uh, introduction with your name and what you do. We'll just start with that. Yeah.
My name is Gerard Brown, and I'm a painter and a writer and a teacher. I don't know if that describes what I do, because what I like to do is hide things in things.
Okay.
So that part of the question is a lot more complicated, but I'll stick to the name. I got that part.
Okay. We'll get to the hiding things in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah. And how did you get introduced to art? We'll just start with that one.
Sure. Well, I like a lot of kids, grew up in the suburbs, it seemed like, and art was something that like nobody was doing. So it seemed like a really good place to be because I didn't have to be with anybody. There was no teams, like not being a team sports kind of person. Being interested in drawing was a good way to kind of make sure you had a lot of time to yourself.
Yeah.
So,
so you didn't really need people around to do it.
Yeah, it did kept people away because, you were doing something so they wouldn't bother you. And,
Okay.
So I have a big family. I come from a big family. So that was important too, was that you have something that you did that, you were the only person who did. So,
how many members in your family, in your immediate family?
So I have 4 sisters and 1 brother.
Is there a big age gap between all of you, or just all at the same bunch?
I'm the 5th, and my oldest sister is about 12 years older than I am, and my youngest sister is about 6 years younger than I am.
Okay.
So there's a kind of big gap between me and an older group, and another gap between me and my younger sister. So it was really easy to hide out in that because there was always a bunch of teenagers they had to worry about, or the little baby they had to worry about. So it was a good place to be without a lot of supervision.
Okay.
Where
did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and my family had moved there from Boston when I was really little. And so there was a degree to which we didn't really feel like we belonged in Virginia, and we were near DC, where nobody really lives all the time. It was always we were kind of surrounded with military families who were coming in and going as presidential administrations changed, government changed.
Right.
So it was a real, and what was great about it was, if you lived there for long enough, like all the school trips would take you downtown. I think, when you ask me, how did I become an artist? I like to draw, but going to the museums when I was a kid, especially the Hirshhorn Museum down in DC, was a really huge thing for me. That, going into the city meant getting out of your kind of suburban dull, place and seeing something exciting and different. So the city and art were big avenues for that. I knew I didn't want to be where I was. I knew there was something else exciting, so I just went for that.
Okay. What kind of things were happening in the neighborhood you grew up in?
People were being jackasses. I mean, it was like a suburban neighborhood in the 70s, and so it was really highly homogenous. There was like the big rivalry between the 2 high schools that were at either ends of Route 236.
Okay.
And it I knew I didn't really feel comfortable in that world. We moved when I was in high school. When I was a teenager, we moved to New York for like a year, and it was such a great opportunity for me because it was like my year abroad. You saw the whole world differently, because living in New York, near the city, not in the, but near enough to the city that you could go downtown anytime you want. My oldest sister was at Columbia at the time, so I would go and visit her in the city, and her research was down in the village. And she was looking at immigration in what had been Little Italy, which was rapidly changing to Chinatown at the time. So you got this total different window into the world. And then we moved back to, like a block away from where I'd been as a child. And I just knew I needed to get out of that suburban, everybody's a defense contractor, everybody's, doing that,
Yeah.
So what was going on there? I was so busy trying to get out of there. I don't really know how to answer the question. What was going on?
Okay. I think that kind of relates to the hiding things.
Maybe.
I'm gonna try my best not to turn this into a psych session.
Yeah, exactly. I'm gonna resist very firmly the idea that we're gonna do psychoanalysis.
How's your relationship with your mother? You don't have to answer that.
A tortoise? No. What's a tortoise?
Okay. So how long were you in Northern Virginia?
Well, too long, when I got out, I tried to get out. I was so unhappy there. I tried to get out of high school early. I took classes in this. I realized when we went to New York that there were like more interesting places to be. So I somehow or another, the school year was different there. So I had more credits than you would get in high school.
Okay.
In Virginia. So when I got back, I realized, wait, I'm ahead of the curve in terms of number of credits you need to graduate. So I took summer courses and I tried to finish high school in 3 years so that I could get out and go somewhere. And I wound up going to like a community college for art in Maryland, didn't get very far. And, crashing and burning so badly that I wound up taking another gap year and like working at a craft store in, not far from where my parents lived for another year before I could finally move away to go to college at Boston University.
Okay.
When I was in my early 20s,
Okay. And what did you end up studying at, was it Boston University?
Yeah. So that was the big fight. I mean, my sisters and my brother have been really successful academics. My oldest sister is a immigration historian I mentioned, and has written numerous books. She's really brilliant. My brother is a professor of especially Southern history, Southern U.S. history. He's published a ton of books. I wanted to study art. Like I said, I didn't know what it was that was drawing me to art making. I don't think, but I knew that I wanted to be there. I think I equated it with things I wanted. So I wanted to study art, and my parents, after having seen how disastrous my year at art school community at Maryland College of Art and Design was, said, you're going to go to a university. So the compromise was Boston University.
Okay.
Because they had an art department and they were near some family in Boston. But it was a weird choice for me because although they had an art department, they had like the second most conservative art department in the country at the time. It was like the Pennsylvania Academy is known for cast drawing and its kind of tradition of figure drawing. BU was like next in line behind them. It was life drawing all the time, figure painting, and it was a very traditional kind of, very, the people who were there were very much informed by early 20th century modernism, and it was a very traditional form of art education for a long time. It was a terrible fit. Like I
Yeah.
really wanted to be, I would go to the library and I would read art forum, and then I would go to class and we would do figure drawing for 9 hours a week, you know? And I
Was
didn't
it,
know how those things like related, you know?
yeah. Were they
But
just, was it more of a focus just on reproduction rather than innovation?
so the theory was that you're going to learn how to do something well, you know?
Uh-huh.
You're going to learn a craft very thoroughly. And then that way, by doing that, you'd be able to transfer that knowledge to applying it to your own kind of creative work and research. But what happened in practice was you practically never used your imagination, you know?
Right.
So it was, it was really hard because I was good at that stuff. I mean, I was really good at that stuff. It turned out I didn't know it, going in. I drew like any other high school kid who, likes comics and, goes to museums. So like I drew well, but I didn't know I drew that well. And I learned how to do that stuff. I was a really good figure painter, was really good at kind of, late 19th century style Beaux-Arts sculpture, that
Yeah.
I didn't want to do, but I was good enough at it that I got a scholarship to pay for it.
Okay.
But I had friends. I had a really good friend who was at Brown at the time, and I would go see her, and she would tell me about the comparative literature classes she was studying, semiotic theory, and I was super interested in that. Did not know what to do with it, and would go back to BU and draw.
Yeah.
And it took a long time after school to sort all that stuff out. But I did, we did. I had some really good friends there who also kind of were butting their head against the way that the thing was constructed. Maybe they'd gone there because for reasons like mine, there were family things that made that school sound like it made sense, as opposed to like the museum school or
Right.
another kind of more contemporary kind of place. And, there were people there who were good to work with, who were great. Stuart Barron was great. John Moore was there for a number of years. Lee Secord was really tried her hardest to help us, kind of live in the century we're living in, and but it was hard to square that. But it did. I mean, I guess maybe it did have its desired effect. Like I learned how to do something really, really well, so that when I wanted to do something else, I knew what depth was involved.
Yeah.
Because I did have to go on and learn something else afterwards. I don't work like that at all anymore.
Yeah. I had a professor in undergrad that had that same philosophy of his whole thing was you have to know the rules to break the rules.
Yeah. So how'd that work with you?
I'm in the long run, it works. I don't know if it's necessary to spend 4 years learning the rules.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think when I met you, you were definitely in a stage of like, I know the rules and now I'm going to break them. You were very conscious of breaking them.
Yeah.
And
like if you just, I'm definitely supportive of teaching people how to just learn the technique and the craft of an art form. But as you're learning it, like while you're learning it, there needs to be room to allow people to break it, just to see what's possible, because otherwise they're just drowning in all these rules and they don't have a chance to do anything with it.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think also there's so much that goes on in school that if you don't try to break them in that space where someone can say, oh, here's what happened, then you don't get as much out of it as when you get out of school and there's no one around to see how you partially succeeded,
Right.
and what you can get out of that partial success,
Yeah.
So yeah, because I mean it always bugged me, and it's funny because like I don't skate, but watching people skate and try to learn how to do things, the kind of repetition that's involved,
Mm-hmm.
the like, the persistence that's involved, I think that I've always hated the idea that art school fosters that it's like you're going to learn a bunch of shit and then you're going to unlearn it, because what's the point of that, right?
Yeah.
But what we're talking about knowing the rules and then breaking them, I mean, it's like knowing that this is possible and you just keep doing it until you figure out your way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of that is how skateboarding tricks are invented.
Right. It's like persistence,
persistence, and a lot, well, yeah, like failure is tied into that, where you're trying one trick and in the process of screwing up on that, you end up learning something else.
Right. And that, that's if all you're doing is trying to learn that one trick and nail that one trick, you don't get the productive detour of inventing something else. And I think that's where this method we're talking about, like, that's the educator I want to be, is the one who says, okay, look, this is the thing we're trying to do. But along the way, you can depart from that, and I can help people see what the distance between what they do and what they were trying to do is,
Yeah.
And if that's for them, because that's the thing, I don't know who they are. They're inventing themselves. That's what education is,
Yeah.
I have no idea what the outcome of that's going to be, but I know how this trick ought to be done. This particular thing with oil paint, or this particular kind of way to put marks down on paper. I know how that ought to be done, and I can measure the distance between what they are and what that thing is, and help them see that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it for both activities, actually.
Cool.
Was there any particular piece of art or artist that not necessarily influence your work, but really, I guess, what was the real catalyst to you, like, seriously pursuing art?
So a lot of these questions ask me to think about, teenage Gerard Brown, and get in touch with this person. And a lot of what I'm interested in about my work, about the work, one of the things that being an artist, I've already said this in a different way, but being an artist meant becoming somebody other than who I felt like my road was paved for, Jasper Johns used to say that the thing that influenced him most was like a Confederate monument in his town in South Carolina where he grew up, because he knew it was made by an artist who wasn't from there, and therefore he wanted to be an artist because it meant you didn't have to be from there.
Yeah.
So I remember, like, being really young, like, my brother would take me to the National Gallery because I think he knew that, like, I don't know what he wanted, but he would take me to the National Gallery because I like to draw. And I remember seeing a Manet painting called The Dead Toreador, and thinking, what the hell? Why would anybody paint this fucking dead person? It's just like, this didn't make any sense to me. It's like, why am I so bothered by this? Of all the kind of, of all the paintings of the 19th century and before that are in that museum, like, why would that one bother me? And then seeing, like, Robert Motherwell's Elegy for the Spanish Republic, and going, well, I totally get that painting, which is this completely abstract painting from, like, the early 60s.
Yeah.
And, what on earth would, like, make me think I got that, But I knew I knew which one I wanted to be,
Okay.
I knew which one I wanted to follow. And I really thought that, like, that sort of mythology of Motherwell and de Kooning and all of that was, like, how you become an artist,
Yeah.
in the 70s, when I was a kid. And that was like a big light for me. And then, once you actually start doing it, you realize, no, that's not it at all,
Right.
or that, I mean,
It changes over time.
It changes. Well, a lot had changed in art making between the time that thing was made and the time I saw it and the time I started trying to get into that field as a professional.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to join an art world that was over before I was even out of diapers.
Yeah.
And that was weird, like just sort of like understanding that. And then you realize, okay, well now, I mean, the 80s was a great time to want to become an artist, because one show, like one thing that really got me very fired up was a show at the Hirshhorn in the early 80s called Content. And the whole premise of the show was like the 10th anniversary of the Hirshhorn's building and all of this. And that's just like a weird collection. If you know the history of it, it's like this guy who was a diplomat, had amassed this really idiosyncratic collection and left it to the Smithsonian. It was their only contemporary art holdings for a long time.
Oh.
So it was just weird. It's like this one guy's strange collection. And he had like fabulous shit. Like he had the whole set of Daumier busts of those little clay busts of the French Parliament. They're all these grotesque caricatures. They're totally amazing. And he had, Roger Brown paintings and Larry Rivers paintings. There's like amazing things. And they had this show called Content, and the theme of the show, the idea behind the show, like you're a high school student and you're thinking about what is the idea behind an art show. Like somebody tells you there's a curatorial agenda to this. First of all, that blows your mind. Like, you didn't just hang up a bunch of pictures. Like,
it's a concept album.
Yeah, exactly. It's a total concept album. Like totally. So you realize, oh my God, like, not only is this thing that I like doing, I'm reasonably good at doing, like something that could also be like as cool as a concept album. Like I could get involved in that, The concept was that art had been without content for a really long time. It had all been about its form. And that the new art of the new art of the 80s was going to be about messages, about content. And it included Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger and Jonathan Borofsky and all these, really interesting people. And it was like this attempt to kind of assert the importance of art being about something, which is such a kind of basic thing. You almost can't believe they had to have that this was an argument, There was a giant Leon Golub painting of people getting tortured. And you're thinking, this is, first of all, this like blows your head away. It's an amazing painting. These paintings, Leon Golub paintings, like blow your mind. But like, who cannot like see this as a great thing? Oh, people who like, shiny chrome obelisks in the fucking desert. Like,
yeah. Oh, man.
And that, and like understanding that dynamic, like you really began like that was a powerful thing for me in terms of knowing the enemy. Because I like so much of what I am interested in is oppositional by nature. There's a lot of shit I'm against. Like,
yeah.
And it made me realize who I was pushing against.
I'm starting to get a sense of a pattern here where the impression I get is like you may be drawn to just abstract horror.
Well, yeah, we may have that in common.
Just check it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
but here's the thing. Can I interject at this moment?
Sure.
Because here's the thing. I think you're exactly right. I'm really interested in abstract horror because I think I'm interested in feelings, right? I'm interested in the terror that is perceived by someone who is confronting his or her mortality. I'm interested in the passion that of whatever crime it is that brought you to that point, and it's offense against society. But I'm really interested in how somehow or another that's not always like something you can talk about. And the art museum seemed, at the moment I was coming up, seemed like a place where that wasn't something you could talk about. So I'm really interested in taking all of that stuff and wrapping it in camouflage so that I can put it into the museum or into the gallery or into the world in such a way that people don't know it's there.
Yes.
So, what was the thing that influenced me that as a young artist? Bugs Bunny and drag.
Yeah.
Watching a cartoon where Bugs Bunny puts on shit crap ass drag and fools Elmer Fudd or Yosemite Sam into believing that he is seductively interested in them.
Yeah.
You as the audience can see this, but the other person in the drama can't see this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a cool situation. Like,
I don't want to stay on this part too long, but I feel like this should be discussed.
Sure.
It's a rabbit in drag.
Oh shit, yeah. What's up with that?
You got a full-grown adult male openly attracted to a rabbit, even though the rabbit's drag.
Losing all control of himself.
Yeah.
I mean, and if you go back to Tex Avery, right? You go back to those things and the wolf, sort of the wolf characters, when they would be confronted with this, going out of his mind, losing all kind of pretenses to civilization. Although frequently they're in their tuxedo. These wolves are dressed in their debonair tuxedos, have up to this moment been, sipping martinis, and then they see the object of their desire, and they lose control.
Yeah.
And you, as the viewer, outside of this, can see all these identities.
Yeah. Which it really, I wish I could go back and have some conversations with the writers of those stories, and just to find out, is like if there were lines of like gender and really if there were just lines at all.
You mean like if were they conscious of their blurring them, do you mean, or what do you mean?
Yeah.
Huh. Because I think it's funny, like if you think about it as a series of signs, right? Bugs Bunny basically is doing nothing more than holding up a sign that says "I'm female."
Yeah.
He'd been holding no sign up before, but now it's holding up a sign that says "I'm female." And that causes the other characters to go mad with desire.
Yeah.
And it's like, does the presence of someone,
that's all it took,
cause desire? Like, that's it? That's all it takes? Like,
I'll come back to, we'll come back to that later in another discussion. But yeah, that's odd.
Yeah. And I don't know why people aren't spending more time thinking about that.
Yeah. Hey, like the semester's over now, but I had a discussion with my class about a similar topic, because like I had a class of 14, it was like 14 women, and we spent a lot of semester just focusing on female issues, because that's something they can all talk about and make work about.
Yeah. And it's something that, we're, as men are in the position to listen,
yeah,
on that. But it's often interesting. I think we talked about this before, I've had a class like that, and, asked to make work that talks about desire. These women that were my students positioned themselves as if they were men.
Mm-hmm.
The things they drew were the kind of object of heterosexual male desire. And it was just like, so what does women's desire look like? Like, can you explain that to me?
Yeah. It's too soon for them. Yeah, it's just too soon for a lot of people to know.
And I think that's part of, maybe this goes back to teaching, and like this idea of teaching like rules is, it doesn't equip students with the vocabulary to ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
What does my desire look like? They just default to depicting another desire that,
the one that they've just been told.
The one they've been told, the one that Victoria's Secret has put out, the one that culture is constantly bombarding us with. So this is desirable.
Yeah.
They never get to ask the question, what do I actually want?
Yeah.
But
like we had we were doing a whole series of projects on index icons and symbols, and it led into just interpretation and deception.
Totally.
And somehow that went into, oh no, we were talking about just stories being reinterpreted and how Disney had taken Beauty and the Beast and turned it into something that it wasn't. They bleached it. And when you break down that story, a beast kidnaps a woman.
Yeah.
And it's like essentially forces her into a position where she eventually develops feelings for a beast.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah. So I was like, when we break this down, we have a beast and a woman. The woman is held in captivity. At some point, that woman develops feelings for that beast. How do you think that happened? And what do you think that beast was doing the entire time that he was with that woman?
Mm-hmm.
And like the class just went silent for a minute and thought about it and was like, oh, yeah, it's a beast.
Exactly. What are we doing? Exactly. And yeah, I mean, and that's, you know, and so let's just keep going on that train for a minute. What is that, you know, at least in the Disney version, that beast is something else who wants that person's affection, not because he wants affection, but because it's going to free him from the state of being a beast.
Yeah.
That the ultimate goal here is really manipulative, deeply manipulative. He needs someone to fall in love with him so that he can shed that drag, that camouflage, that disguise that he's been forced to wear, you know?
Yeah.
And where Bugs Bunny is choosing to do this and causing affection, causing desire, you know?
Yeah. There's a lot of hidden messages and themes going on here.
Yeah, you know.
But yeah, they didn't like that part of class too much.
When you mean the part where you ruin their childhood?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff I did not tell them because I didn't want to get fired. I think at this point we can really just go right into like how you came about hiding messages inside either abstract or what are really just like aesthetically beautiful images.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you find it beautiful. I'm really interested in people finding them beautiful. Like I want them to be things that people want to look at, you know. I want them to be holding up that sign that says, "Look at me," you know. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful, you know. You know, I want them to look like the kind of thing that looks like art, you know, which is why I'm like using painting still, and you know,
you
know, because that's the thing I'm trying to take apart from inside. That's the thing I'm trying to mess with, you know. Early on, you know, so I you know, early on, when I got done with this really academic kind of education, when I was still at BU, I began to think about how I had a great teacher, John Moore, I mentioned him already, who made up these fabulous landscapes. And they were sort of photorealistic, but they were composites of things. They were, you know, things were where they shouldn't be, but they seemed very believable. They were these very believable spaces. And he's, you know, he's been a very influential teacher to a lot of people around Philadelphia. He used to teach at Tyler, and then he taught at Penn. But when I was studying with him in the 80s, I would look at these paintings and wonder like why he was rearranging the world. Like, what was he doing? Why was it not okay? Why was like, you know, why did this building have to be moved that way, or this thing come in from there, you know? And, you know, it was funny because like, you know, I was wrestling with the kind of the joke about my school. Why did the BU student paint the still life? Because it's there. You know, I didn't realize that part of what, you know, we do as artists and composers, we don't take everything from the world, we filter it and we rearrange it, and we compose it to something that, you know, pleases us, carries our message, whatever, you know?
Yeah.
And he's just doing that. But I saw the landscape as a thing you could do that with, in a way. So, you know, being kind of a you know, slow learner, I just kept painting landscapes, you know, thinking about what he'd done. And gradually I began to see other opportunities to sneak things into them. Especially signs. Like, you know, I could, as I painted like urban landscapes, I would invent signage for them, you know,
Okay.
or I would invent like relationships between things that allowed me to kind of sneak in like an inside joke about somebody. So like one painting might have, you know, a billboard with a friend of mine's car on it, but you would see it through a grate of, through a lattice of billboard structures that, you know, produced a big X that went over it to describe how that thing was no longer working. You know,
That's
you know, like, you know,
that's a lot of work.
it was a lot of work because they were. I like really elaborate jokes. Like I like things that take a lot of table setting. You know,
Uh-huh.
take a lot of work. You know,
Yeah.
not. So I began to figure that out, and I began to figure out how I could kind of. And I mean, I knew this had been going on. This goes on in painting all the time. People have been putting sneaking messages into paintings forever. There's a great book by Jim Elkins called "Why Are All Our Pictures Puzzles?" that, you know, talks about this going back to the northern Renaissance in the, you know, 1400s, 1500s. And so I was like really interested in this idea that you could have like messages embedded, hidden in paintings, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the point, you know, it's out of school a few years, and I got to this point where I realized, and this is, you know, the 90s, people were starting to get computers, and we're starting to look at digital photographs more than photographs. We're starting to be aware of pixels, and we're starting to be aware of different kinds of a different construction of things than had been going on up to that point. And I started to think about, well, what would happen if I could use each unit of the image as a part of a message in itself, you know. So if each pixel had a job building the brick wall of the picture, but also was a carrier of its own meaning,
Okay.
you know. So long story short, I figured out, oh, I could replace each pixel with a dot, and each dot could be a part of a code, like for example Braille.
Mm-hmm.
So I started taking apart pictures and using Photoshop, drop the resolution a lot, replace all the pixels with Braille, you know, and repaint that. And you'd wind up with these eerie, blurry, crazy photographs of people, sort of hand painted photographs of them that were comprised of messages, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, they looked sort of like abstract paintings, like they snuck into the conversation of the art school as abstract paintings, but they mostly often said things about how painting is a waste of time and that painting is a poor means of communication, that writing is vastly superior, you know. And, you know, like, they were, you know, drawn from like painting, like I was an art critic for a number of years. I spent a lot of time reading about, you know, the different theoretical approaches to how art becomes meaningful, and I would transcribe those messages into the paintings. So they were basically self-destructive arguments against themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they would sneak into rooms or in exhibits as painting, but they would be really kind of destructive in their relationship to that. And then, you know, they started, because of the way they were made, they sort of looked a little like Chuck Close.
Yeah.
And so you know, it's like, you know, I don't want to be too identified with that, you know? So I started making ones that were just about patterns, just the Braille. And they would be descriptions of color, for example, you know?
Has anyone ever described your process as
Fucked
Duchamp
up? Oh,
on
no, sorry.
pointillism?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Has anyone ever described your process during that period of time as Duchamp taking on pointillism?
No, but I would have been really pleased if they had, because like I had, you know, I had been through this kind of school that really objected to Duchamp, like it was a routine thing to, Duchamp was all of it was anti-retinal, preconceptual, didn't, wanted to make dry paintings. All these things I knew I didn't know I wanted to do. But we'd been kind of like, there'd been this earnest attempt to kind of brainwash us away from that to some extent.
Yeah.
And I hated him, but then I came to love him.
I had a similar experience.
And I just came to realize, no, this is really where the interesting thinking is in challenging painting the way he did.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be delighted to hear, to have heard that,
Okay. Because I'm thinking of a scene of the bathers.
Yeah.
On the river, and just like if every little point was actually a painting or like a word in itself.
Right. And this idea, like, right. And I mean, that's sort of what it gets down to is at a certain point, what if we stopped thinking the world was meaningless? What if we stopped going through our lives and saying, well, that doesn't matter. That's meaningless. I don't care what she says. I don't care what he says. Nothing really matters. What if we started treating everything as meaningful, down to very tiny things, down to little gestures? What if we, to little atoms of meaning? What if we, grains of sand? What if we started treating all of that stuff as meaningful? I mean, we could be crazy in another way. How could she possibly have said that to me when it was really not that important? But it was, for me, a very different philosophical prospect than I'd been in in parts of my life where I didn't know what was going on, that Northern Virginia childhood where, it was like, we're gonna go to this school with its great sports team, and we're gonna get a job at this, defense contractor, we're going to buy a car, and we're going to get married and have a family, and like all of those things that just sort of happen and they don't really mean much, but they're landmarks, so you do them. Like, I didn't want to have an unexamined life.
Yeah.
And that way of working, I mean, at the end of the day, as an artist, your job is to find a way to not to make art, but to make the practice of making art into something that makes you into the person you want to be. And that's what I figured out, was how to make paintings that made me pay attention to small things, that made me pay attention to messages that were hidden, that made me pay attention to things I ignored or thought were meaningless.
Mm-hmm. How has the last year, 2020, I mean, this could even just be expanded to the last 4 years. How have the last 4 years affected your practice making art? And what have you discovered through your artwork?
So it's interesting, look at the last 4 years, right? A dark, dark time in American history.
Lower.
Yeah. But when I started this, 4 years ago, what I was working on, I was doing research into on sites like the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Anti-Defamation League, into the activities of fringe groups like like Stormfront and all of those kind of sort of white supremacist crazy groups, because I'd become aware of the phenomenon of dog whistle politics. It's something that I had grown up with in Virginia and not known about very much, not understood. And as I through the early 20th century, 21st century, I become more aware of it in the political landscape. And it was certainly a phenomena during the Bush years and the Obama years, but I'd become more and more interested in the way that groups that were, hate groups and anti-democratic groups would hide in plain sight, through the use of and communicate through the open air, through fashion choices and images and numbers and things like that, And 4 years ago, the dog whistle disappeared and was replaced by the bullhorn. And, Trump just stopped pretending that he wasn't a racist, right? He would just do these ridiculous things. And in a way, like, it's sort of like, this time has been challenging because the mask has been torn off of so much of that stuff, that the interest in seeing double, seeing that Bugs Bunny in drag and seeing Bugs Bunny at the same time, has been, well, now all you see is the bold faced message of those very fine people,
Yeah.
And that has been a challenge. And I've been trying, a lot of the work I've been trying to do has been about taking this kind of idea of messages that are hidden in a public space, open key cryptography, if you will, that, and appropriating them for, my political beliefs, which are considerably more left than, So it's been, the last few years has been kind of like watching all the makeup, all the stagecraft laid bare, as messages become bold-faced and not hidden at all, and that's been very weird,
Yeah. What do you think your work would look like stripped of its drag?
Propaganda.
Is there any difference
between my work and propaganda?
Yeah.
I think that less and less. I think because of this time, that I'm describing where I think we really, I think that if we're going to fight against lowlifes and cheaters, we have to take the gloves off,
Mm-hmm.
I think the idea of disguising the work in some way to make it look like art seems really kind of objectionable to me now. I'm like much more interested in doing things that go out into the world and commercial spheres, and I don't care so much about galleries, which is why I've been making more stickers, more wheels, more things like that, than paintings. I mean, I still like paintings, but they're what I make really well. But I've been thinking about other things that can go out there, to give people the means of recognizing their own allies.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I'm interested in. I've seen my enemies become more visible. If I can come up with ways to make my allies more visible, I'm all for that. That's something I think is a good project.
That sounds pretty good.
And this is what we did together with these wheels. That's that.
Yeah.
It's a visual cue that someone shares your message, your values.
What would you like to do next?
It's funny, I feel like at this stage in my life, there's a lot of momentum, like it's very hard to think about what you want to do next, because what you want to do next is informed by the things you did like 5 steps back
Mhm.
because you're on so much of a trajectory. I think, I'm no longer interested in making things that talk about the relation between one approach to painting and another approach to painting, because I feel like that's too small of a conversation. It's important to me, but it's not important to the people I'm talking to anymore. The people, I feel like I need to engage with more people, you know?
Mhm.
So I've been choosing things that to quote, the things that I encode, the quotes that I encode have been coming from sources that are, much broader. I'm working on, like I did I've been working on some, there's a fabulous quote. I want to make sure I get it right. Um, from Asada Shakur about the nature of power, that is one that I've been working with, and I've been thinking about how these things, when you make these things that are like that, want to be more connected to people's lives, that are trying to be more useful to them, less academic, more
Mhm.
directly useful. Um, they have more voices in them, you know. So instead of being like a single message encoded, they now have multiple different messages encoded in different ways. So there might be song lyrics, the hidden quote, another piece of text, all of these things kind of coming together in a lot of crosstalk. So instead of like a sign, they're now more like different messages shouting over one another, you know, um,
Okay.
in hopefully in some productive kind of way, you know. Um, that's what I'm working on now, is trying to figure out how to do that, you know,
Okay.
how to be more useful. I mean, I'm really interested in. I've made lots of products,
Yeah.
that are encodable, that are encoded and out there. There's scarves and pins and jewelry and decals and t-shirts and things like that, that people can wear, and buttons, lots of buttons. Buttons were really important when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Um, lots of buttons and things like that people could wear, that other people can see them and say, "Oh, I'm connected to you." But and I like that, but I also still want to keep making paintings, making things that people stand in front of together and talk about.
Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Um, is there anybody you'd like to thank?
Well, you, for the opportunity to do this. You know
That wasn't set up.
that. No, 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 no.
But yeah,
My
thank you.
partner, my wife Carmina, is always my one of like the first sounding board for these things, for a lot of things, and really
Mhm.
makes it possible for me to get stuff done. You know, um, my you know my my students give me a lot of ideas. They sort of put me in touch with parts of the world that it's really easy for me to lose touch with. My nature is to go to my studio and get holed up and want to be alone, and they force me into contact with things. You know,
Good.
so that's important. And again, that's another thing I have you to thank for. Because again, I mean, it's very easy for me to get holed up in my own head, in my own space. And so,
No
this was a
hiding.
great project to do that, to get me out of that space.
All right. Um, well, if I can think of anything else that I think your work would lend itself to, I will definitely let you know.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm curious, I hope, we'll see people, on these wheels, and, and that they'll see, more importantly, they'll see other people on them too.
Mhm.
They'll all use a decoder, figure out what it says, you
Yeah.
know, find their friends, create new messages with it, because the decoder is not is a generative tool. Now you can create your own messages, you know. So,
I think you just gave me another idea.
there you go.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you. and I'll be in touch about that other idea.
Okay. Two lats.